A single night in Rome, when the streets were empty. The night arrives without ceremony. It does not knock. It does not announce itself with sound or spectacle. It simply settles over the city the way dust settles on unused stone. Rome has seen louder nights. Rome has survived nights worth recording. This is not one of them. Nothing important happens. No banners fall. No alarms ring. And that is precisely why this night matters. Late night history prefers moments like this. Moments that did not believe they were being watched. Moments that left no witnesses because none were required. If you listen closely enough, you can almost hear the city exhale. Not in relief, in fatigue. Before you drift any deeper, if this quiet helps you feel safe tonight, you are welcome to stay with us. Subscribing softly keeps this place gentle and allows these long hours to continue unfolding. Now rest. This is a night that does not ask anything from you. Rome in the year 260 does not collapse in front of us. It does not demand sympathy. It simply continues at a lower volume. The streets are still paved, the walls are still standing. The buildings have not forgotten their purpose, but fewer people feel the need to move between them. The absence is not dramatic. It is practical. People stay inside because they have learned that going out no longer offers much in return. No danger waits in the shadows tonight. No triumph either. The city has reached a stage where effort feels optional and rest feels earned. There was a time when Rome refused to sleep. Even after sunset, the city insisted on being seen. Oil lamps flickered along familiar paths. Footsteps overlapped. Voices bounced off stone and returned slightly altered. The night belonged to those who could not afford silence. Vendors finishing late. Workers rising early. Guards performing routines older than memory. The city once took pride in this persistence. A place that never fully stopped was a place that mattered. Tonight, that confidence feels unnecessary. The streets are not empty because of fear. That would at least imply urgency. They are empty because the city has learned moderation. Rome has discovered that constant movement does not equal stability. The people who remain indoors are not hiding. They are conserving. Energy, attention, expectations. Even the architecture seems to understand. Wide avenues stretch without complaint. Columns wait without purpose. The city does not resent the quiet. It accommodates it. Light still exists, but it has become selective. Lamps burn where they are needed and nowhere else. Shadows claim more territory than they used to, not aggressively, politely. Darkness moves in the way an old tenant moves back into a familiar room. It does not rearrange the furniture. It simply occupies space that has been left unused. The night does not feel hostile. It feels economical. Sound behaves differently as well. In a city built to echo noise, the silence feels almost architectural. Small sounds travel farther. A distant step becomes noticeable. A closing door gains significance. Even then, nothing follows. The night does not build tension. It disperses it. This is not the silence before an event. It is the silence after ambition has grown tired. Some people are still awake. Habit is hard to extinguish. Guards continue their rounds even when no one watches them pass. Their footsteps follow paths laid out long before this night learned how to be quiet. There is something faintly humorous about duty performed in near anonymity. A system continuing because stopping would require explanation. Rome has always been excellent at continuation. Even now it performs endurance with quiet professionalism. Inside the buildings, people remain alert without purpose. Sleep does not arrive easily, but neither does restlessness demand action. They lie awake not because of anxiety, but because the body has not yet learned how to stop earlier than it used to. The city once trained its inhabitants to move constantly. Unlearning that lesson takes time. Tonight is part of the adjustment. Markets have closed earlier than they once did. Not in panic, simply because staying open no longer feels useful. Goods remain available. Demand has thinned. Commerce has not failed. It has downsized. The economy of night has discovered restraint. Rome always admired excess. Tonight it tolerates absence. The residential blocks rise quietly above the streets. Many rooms are occupied. Few announce it. Windows remain dark, not out of secrecy, but out of disinterest. The city is full, yet invisible. A place can be crowded and empty at the same time. Rome proves this effortlessly. Nothing disastrous occurs during this night. That is important to say, plainly. There is no singular moment to blame later, no story to simplify, no date to underline. The city does not fall asleep and wake up changed. It simply sleeps slightly longer than before. Decline here does not resemble drama. It resembles routine. The structures remain impressive. Stone does not respond to mood. Columns hold weight regardless of attendance. The city still looks capable, perhaps too capable, built for an audience larger than the one that remains. Rome has become a stage where the set outlasts the play. This night passes without instruction. Morning will come, people will move again, the streets will remember footsteps, but something subtle has shifted. Not enough to record, enough to feel. Rome has learned that it can exist without insisting on presence. That lesson does not arrive loudly, it arrives the way this night does, calmly, without witnesses. If you find your breathing slower now, that is acceptable. History does not always need to be followed. Sometimes it is enough to walk beside it until it grows quiet on its own. Stay as long as you like. Nothing here is in a hurry. Rome was a city that never learned how to sleep. Rome did not fall asleep easily. It was not designed for rest. It was designed for passage. Even after the sun lowered itself behind the hills and shadows stretched across stone, the city continued to behave as if someone might be watching. Streets remained useful. Corners stayed occupied. Night was not an ending, but a change of shift. Rome understood darkness as a different operating mode, not a pause. In its confident years, the city treated night as an extension of daylight, with fewer rules and softer edges. Oil lamps burned not to romanticize the dark, but to negotiate with it. Light was placed where feet needed reassurance, where faces needed recognition, where transactions required a witness. The glow was uneven and practical. No one expected the night to be fully visible. They only expected it to be navigable. Taverns did not wait for permission to stay open. They remained active because people continued to arrive, workers finishing late, travelers arriving too early, citizens who preferred movement over silence. Wine was poured not as celebration but as punctuation between hours. Conversation drifted. Laughter rose and fell without ceremony. The city did not need noise to feel alive. It produced sound naturally the way a crowded room breathes. Vendors moved through narrow streets, carrying goods that could not wait for morning. Bread that needed to be sold while warm. Water that needed to be delivered before dawn. Objects that did not care about schedules. Rome respected necessity more than comfort. If something had to be done, it would be done regardless of the hour. Night did not argue. Guards walked their routes with practiced indifference. Their presence was expected, not admired. They did not exist to reassure the city. They existed because a city this large required movement, even when most people slept. Their steps overlapped night after night until the sound became part of the background. A city that never truly rested learned to accept constant motion as normal. Not everyone outside at night had a reason worth explaining. Some people simply remained awake. Insomnia was not a condition that demanded sympathy. It was a state that found its place in the urban flow. Those who could not sleep found others like them. Streets offered distraction. The city absorbed wakefulness the way it absorbed everything else, without judgment, without concern. Rome took quiet pride in this refusal to stop. A city that never slept was a city that mattered. Movement equaled importance, presence equaled relevance. To be passed through was to be acknowledged. Even buildings seemed to lean into this logic. Wide roads invited use. Arches framed passage. Public spaces assumed they would be occupied at all hours. Rome was built for circulation, not retreat. There was something faintly ironic in this ambition, a city constructed to ensure that someone was always walking through it, always witnessing it, always confirming that it remained essential. Rome did not trust stillness. Stillness felt like neglect. If a street was empty too long, it risked feeling forgotten. And forgotten places have a habit of becoming irrelevant. The night economy thrived because the city demanded it. People adapted to the expectation of constant availability. Shops adjusted hours. Labor stretched itself thin. Even leisure became scheduled around productivity. Rome did not ask whether this was sustainable. It asked whether it was impressive. For a long time, the answer seemed obvious. The streets remained full, lamps stayed lit, voices carried, the city appeared tireless. But endurance is not the same as rest. The night absorbed exhaustion quietly. People learned to function while depleted. Rome learned to appear strong while accumulating fatigue. When the streets later emptied, it was not because danger suddenly arrived. It was because the reward for movement quietly disappeared. The city no longer offered enough in return for staying awake. Commerce slowed. Encounters thinned. The night lost its appeal, not its safety. That change did not feel dramatic. It felt logical. Looking back at the nights when Rome refused to sleep reveals something uncomfortable. Constant motion had masked fragility. Noise had disguised dependence. The city needed people to keep moving in order to justify its scale. When movement slowed, the excess became visible. The lamps that once guided footsteps began to feel optional. The taverns that once filled naturally required effort. Guards continued walking, but fewer eyes followed them. The night shifted from participation to observation. Rome did not notice the change immediately. Cities rarely do. There is something gently amusing about a city that believed it could outpace fatigue forever. That thought feels ambitious in a way that borders on naive. Rome built itself to be passed through endlessly, as if human energy were an unlimited resource. The night eventually disagreed, quietly, without protest. In remembering the Rome that never slept, we are not witnessing a golden age. We are observing a phase, a period when activity felt synonymous with meaning. The city equated being busy with being necessary. The later silence did not erase this past. It revealed it. When the streets finally grew empty, they were not betraying their purpose. They were fulfilling it differently. A passage does not cease to exist When no one walks through it, it simply waits. Rome learned that lesson slowly. Stone has more patience than people. Tonight, when we imagine those earlier nights full of light and sound, we are not meant to envy them. We are meant to understand what was lost when they ended. Not excitement, not noise, but the illusion that a city could remain awake forever, without consequence. The Rome that once refused sleep eventually learned how to rest. It did so reluctantly, gradually, without announcement. And that quiet adjustment tells us more about the city than any festival or triumph ever did. When the streets stopped asking to be used. The streets did not disappear. That is the first thing worth clarifying. Stone does not vanish simply because fewer feet touch it. Rome did not wake one morning to find its roads erased. They remained where they had always been, broad, narrow, curving, familiar. What changed was not their presence, but their purpose. The streets were still perfectly capable of being walked. They simply stopped being necessary. For a long time, movement had been the default condition of the city. You went out because staying inside felt like a missed opportunity. Something was always happening somewhere else. A transaction, a conversation, a delay worth filling with motion. To remain indoors too long felt wasteful. The city rewarded circulation. It made movement feel productive, even when it achieved very little. Then gradually that reward faded. No decree announced the shift. No authority suggested people stay home. The change arrived through small calculations repeated often enough to feel natural. Going out began to require justification. Not because it was dangerous, not because it was forbidden, but because it no longer promised much in return. The streets asked for energy and offered very little compensation. People noticed without discussing it. They lingered inside a bit longer. They postponed errands. They combined tasks into fewer trips. Movement became deliberate rather than automatic. Rome did not close itself. It condensed. The streets responded by becoming quieter without complaint. Stone does not demand attention. It waits. A road does not feel offended when unused. It does not measure its worth by traffic. That is a human habit. The streets simply remained available, wide enough, empty enough, patient. There was something faintly ironic in this reversal. For centuries, Rome had invested enormous effort in making movement effortless. Roads were leveled, surfaces repaired, paths widened, all to ensure that people could pass through with minimal resistance. Now that convenience exposed an uncomfortable truth, when movement costs little, it also becomes easier to abandon. No one blocked the exits, no one guarded the corners. Doors remained open, thresholds stayed familiar. The city offered no resistance to leaving. People simply found fewer reasons to do so. Motivation eroded quietly. Inside the buildings, life continued at a reduced scale. People ate, slept, worked, waited. The rhythm slowed, but did not stop. Interiors absorbed activity that once spilled outward. Conversations happened closer together. Tasks compressed into smaller spaces. The city began folding inward like a well-used map. This contraction did not feel dramatic. It felt efficient. Why walk across the city for something that could wait? Why expose yourself to effort when stillness provided the same outcome? Rome had trained its inhabitants to value practicality above all else. Now practicality favored staying in. The streets lost their role as connectors and became backdrops. They framed the city without participating in it. From windows and doorways, people could see empty paths stretching beyond their immediate needs. The distance itself became instructive. Space reminded them how much effort it required to cross. There is a subtle humor in a city discovering that it has built more pathways than it needs. Rome had always assumed that growth meant expansion. More roads, more access, more movement. It took decline to reveal that excess infrastructure does not collapse on its own. It simply waits to be acknowledged as surplus. Some streets still saw use. Habit is resilient. Certain routes remained busy enough to justify their existence. Others slipped into quiet redundancy. A road once known for activity became a passage remembered rather than used. Memory replaced function. At night, the emptiness became more pronounced. Darkness had always altered movement, but now it amplified absence. Lamps lit paths that no longer carried footsteps. Light fell on stone without interruption. The effect was not eerie. It was neutral. The city illuminated itself out of routine rather than necessity. The people who stayed inside did not feel deprived. On the contrary, they often felt relieved. Movement had become optional. Rest no longer required apology. The city that once equated presence with value slowly accepted absence as reasonable. Rome did not shrink physically, it shrank in usage, a difference subtle enough to escape immediate notice. Buildings remained impressive, streets remained navigable, only the demand placed upon them diminished. The city became larger than its needs. This imbalance produced a peculiar calm. Without constant movement, the city felt less urgent. Time stretched, night extended. The pressure to participate eased. Rome had always been overwhelming by design. Its scale reminded inhabitants of their place within something vast. Now that vastness felt oddly gentle. There is something almost polite about a city stepping back from its own intensity. Rome did not protest its reduced role. It adapted. Roads accepted disuse. Public spaces tolerated emptiness. The city discovered that it could continue without insisting on full occupancy. This quiet was not a sign of immediate failure. It was a sign of adjustment, systems recalibrating, people choosing conservation over display. Rome learning that not every street needed to be walked every night to justify its existence. The idea of an unnecessary street would have sounded absurd in earlier centuries. Every road once implied purpose, trade, control, connection. Now some roads implied only history. They led somewhere important once, that was enough. As the city contracted inward, the boundaries between public and private softened. Homes became worlds. Streets became transitions rather than destinations. The importance of being seen diminished. The importance of being comfortable increased. Rome did not announce this change. It did not commemorate it. No one wrote about the first night when staying inside felt normal. Such shifts rarely attract attention. They do not feel like events. They feel like decisions repeated until they no longer feel like decisions at all. The streets continued to exist without complaint. That may be their greatest quality. They did not demand revival. They did not deteriorate immediately. They remained as potential rather than necessity, a reminder of what the city had once required from its people. In time, some of those streets would find new purposes. Others would remain quiet. But on this night they simply rested, not because they were broken, but because they were no longer needed in the way they once were. Rome did not become smaller in ambition overnight. It became smaller in movement. And that distinction matters. A city can survive without growth. It can even survive without noise. What it cannot survive is constant exhaustion. The streets stepping out of use were not signs of decay. They were signs of restraint. In that sense, the Empty streets were not failures. They were acknowledgments. Rome recognizing that it had reached a point where less was enough. The streets had already stopped asking to be used. That much was settled. What followed was quieter and more intimate. Absence stopped feeling temporary and began to feel normal. The city did not announce this adjustment. It practiced it, night after night, door by door, window by window. Staying inside shifted from choice to reflex, not because anyone demanded it, not because the outside threatened punishment, simply because the inside asked less. Late-night history notices these moments because they are easy to miss while living through them. Habit rarely feels historic. It feels practical. And practicality has a way of rewriting cities without ever raising its voice. At first, people noticed the change only in passing. A glance at the door that never quite became a step through it, a coat left on its hook, a lamp extinguished earlier than usual. None of these actions felt meaningful on their own. Together they formed a pattern. The city was not being abandoned. It was being declined politely. Staying inside began to feel efficient. The night outside no longer offered conversation worth the effort. Encounters had thinned. Familiar faces appeared less often. The small rewards that once justified movement had lost their shine. Inside there was warmth, predictability, control. Rome had always rewarded discipline. Now it rewarded stillness. The night ceased to function as a social extension of the day. It stopped being a space for exchange and became a stretch of time to endure quietly. The hours between sunset and morning were no longer filled by default. They were allowed to remain empty. This felt unusual at first. Then it felt sensible. People adapted quickly. Humans tend to. They reorganized their routines around interiors. Meals grew simpler, conversations shorter, silence more acceptable. The city did not resist this shift. It accommodated it. Rome had room to spare. Without the pressure to be seen, the night grew softer. No one waited to be noticed. No one performed availability. The expectation of participation dissolved. The city learned how to rest without instruction. It is tempting to imagine that this kind of quiet would feel oppressive. It did not. It felt earned. After centuries of constant motion, Rome discovered the relief of doing less. The night stopped asking for contribution. It allowed withdrawal without judgment. Inside the buildings, people remained awake without urgency. Sleep arrived when it wanted. Wakefulness no longer demanded direction. There was no need to go anywhere to justify being conscious. The body could exist without purpose for a few hours, and the city did not collapse as a result. Outside, the streets adjusted to their reduced role. They held silence easily. Stone does not crave attention. Lamps continued to burn in some places more out of habit than need. Light fell across empty ground without protest. Darkness settled into unused corners like an old acquaintance. This was not a fearful quiet. It did not carry expectation. Nothing waited in it. The absence of sound was not suspenseful. It was neutral. Rome learned that silence does not always precede disaster. Sometimes it follows fatigue. The city had long relied on unspoken rules to keep itself moving. Now it learned that no rules were needed to keep it still. No guards enforced emptiness. No curfews shaped behavior. People simply stayed where they were. There is something faintly amusing about a civilization that once mastered control, discovering the ease of self-restraint. Rome did not lose authority over its people. It gained indifference. Movement became optional. Participation voluntary. The city stopped demanding proof of loyalty through presence. As the nights grew quieter, the idea of going out began to feel unnecessary rather than forbidden. That distinction mattered. Prohibition creates resistance. Irrelevance creates disinterest. Rome encountered the latter. The habit of staying in settled deeply. It reshaped expectations. Children grew accustomed to quieter nights. Adults adjusted their sense of normal. What once felt like absence became atmosphere. The city accepted this without commentary. No one gathered to discuss the change. Discussion would have implied urgency. There was none. The shift felt personal. Individual decisions aligning without coordination. A citywide agreement formed without signatures. Rome learned to be silent without instruction. That may have been its most advanced adaptation. Silence arrived not as loss, but as balance. The city that once equated activity with importance now tolerated inactivity without panic. The night became less about connection and more about containment. Homes held people, streets held nothing. Both did their jobs well. This was not the end of the city. It was the end of insistence. Rome stopped asking its inhabitants to prove that it mattered by walking through it at night. It allowed them to stay where they were, and in doing so, it revealed something quietly profound. A city does not need constant motion to exist. Sometimes it only needs permission to be still. The night learned to use less light. The night does not arrive as an enemy. It arrives as a suggestion. Rome learns this slowly. Light does not vanish from the city in a single evening. It becomes selective. Lamps continue to burn, but fewer of them feel necessary. Late-night history is drawn to this moment because it rarely announces itself. People remember fires and darkness imposed by force. They rarely remember restraint, chosen quietly. This is a night where illumination is not lost, but reconsidered. And that reconsideration changes everything without appearing to change much at all. Oil lamps remain part of the city. Their glass is still cleaned, their wicks still trimmed. Someone still remembers how to light them. But lighting becomes a decision rather than a habit. Each flame carries a question that does not need to be spoken. Does this space require brightness, or will dimness suffice? The answer is often simpler than expected. There was a time when light represented confidence. A lit street implied purpose. It suggested that someone would pass through. That activity was expected. Illumination was an invitation, a claim that the city was awake and ready. In those years, Rome treated darkness as something to push back, to control, to reduce wherever possible. Light was a declaration. Now the declaration feels unnecessary. The city no longer needs to prove that it exists. Lamps still burn where they matter, doorways, corners that guide familiar paths, spaces where safety depends on visibility. Elsewhere, the light recedes without protest. Darkness is allowed to occupy ground that no longer serves a function. Inside homes, the shift is almost intimate. Lamps are turned lower, rooms accept shadow earlier in the evening, people sit closer together or closer to the light they keep. The glow becomes personal rather than public. Conversation adjusts, voices soften. The reduced light seems to slow time slightly. Nothing demands to be seen at once. Outside, the change is clearer. Streets stretch longer than the reach of the lamps that remain. Pools of light form gentle interruptions in a wider field of shadow. Walking becomes more deliberate, not because danger increases, but because attention sharpens. Light guides movement rather than flooding it. There is something faintly ironic in watching a city once proud of its brightness learn to use less of it. Rome invested enormous effort in controlling the night. To dim itself voluntarily feels almost humorous, as if a performer stepped back from the stage lights and discovered that the audience did not vanish. They simply sat more comfortably. Some lamps remain lit for reasons no one questions. Maintenance routines persist. A city does not easily abandon its habits. Someone fills the oil. Someone lights the wick. The system continues even when the purpose has faded. There is a quiet comedy in this loyalty. Light maintained for streets that no longer require it. Procedure outlasting necessity. Where lamps have gone dark, nothing dramatic occurs. No chaos fills the space, no sudden fear takes hold. The street remains legible. Stone remembers its shape. Darkness does not erase structure. It reveals it differently. Edges soften. Distances feel longer. The city becomes less demanding on the eyes. Light has shifted from symbol to resource. It is no longer a statement of power. It is a tool used sparingly. People consider where it helps and where it does not. This calculation influences behavior more effectively than any rule could. When light is valued, movement naturally decreases. The night grows calmer under reduced illumination, not because it hides danger, but because it reduces stimulation. Fewer details compete for attention. The city feels quieter, even when sound has not changed. Darkness simplifies. Rome adapts without instruction. No announcements explain the dimming. No authority takes credit. The adjustment happens through countless small decisions that align without coordination. A lamp not relit. A room left in shadow. A street accepted as dark. The city agrees with itself without speaking. There is no romance in this dimness. It is practical. Lamps are not extinguished dramatically. They are simply not given priority. Light fades through omission rather than force. The effect feels polite, almost courteous. In the reduced glow, buildings appear more honest. Without full illumination, they no longer compete for attention. Architecture becomes background rather than performance. Streets stop asking to be admired. They wait patiently for use. The idea that light once symbolized progress now feels slightly outdated. Progress here is learning to conserve, to recognize sufficiency. Rome does not reject illumination, it refines it. Enough light to move, enough dark to rest. As the night deepens, the remaining lamps hold their ground calmly. They do not attempt to reclaim the shadows. They coexist. This balance feels stable. The city does not look diminished. It looks settled. Nothing terrible follows this restraint. No collapse arrives because fewer lamps burn. Life continues. Perhaps with less urgency than before. The streets accept their dimness. The people accept their limits. The night becomes a partner rather than an opponent. This is how the city learns moderation. Not through loss, through choice, not through disaster, through quiet agreement. Light remains, just no longer everywhere, and that is enough. He Knight had already learned to use less light. That lesson settled quietly into the streets and rooms of the city. What followed was not panic or confusion, but familiarity. Darkness no longer arrived as an interruption. It arrived as a condition that people recognized. Vision adjusted, expectations adjusted. The city discovered that not seeing everything clearly did not automatically mean losing control. Late night history lingers here because fear often fades before anyone thinks to record it. What replaces it rarely feels dramatic enough to remember. At first, the dimness felt temporary. People assumed the light would return in full strength, that this reduced glow was a phase. But nights continued to arrive with the same restraint. Lamps stayed low, streets remained partially unseen, and nothing went wrong. The absence of consequence taught a quiet lesson. Darkness could exist without demanding explanation. People learned to navigate without complete clarity. They walked more slowly, they memorized paths. Corners became familiar shapes rather than detailed views. The city did not collapse because fewer details were visible. It became calmer. When vision narrowed, attention followed. The world shrank to what mattered immediately. That reduction felt oddly reassuring. Inside homes, the change felt even gentler. Rooms were no longer expected to be fully revealed at night. Shadows settled into corners without apology. Objects faded into suggestion. People stopped reaching for clarity. They accepted approximation. Life did not require precision after sunset. There is something faintly humorous about how much effort had once been spent resisting the dark. Lamps everywhere, light as a declaration of competence, the belief that visibility equaled safety. The city had assumed that to see everything was to manage everything. Now it learned that this was unnecessary, perhaps even exhausting. Darkness did not erase familiarity. People still knew where things were. Hands reached confidently. Steps landed where expected. Memory replaced sight in small, reliable ways. The city functioned on knowledge rather than exposure. That shift reduced anxiety rather than increasing it. Outside, the streets took on a different character. Without full illumination, they no longer competed for attention. A road did not need to display itself to exist. It held space quietly. Darkness softened distances. A long street felt shorter when only part of it could be seen at once. The mind stopped racing ahead. The absence of fear was not immediate. Old instincts lingered. A shadow still caught the eye. A sound still paused movement. But repeated nights without incident dulled these reactions. Darkness stopped being a signal. It became background. Rome had always trained its inhabitants to be alert, to notice, to respond. Now it trained them to relax their vigilance. The city discovered that constant awareness was not sustainable. Reduced light encouraged selective attention. Only what mattered remained in focus. The night was no longer something to be conquered. It was something to move within. People stopped opposing it. They adapted. That adaptation was quiet. It did not require instruction. The body learned first. The mind followed. There is irony in a civilization once obsessed with control learning comfort in partial surrender. Darkness was not welcomed with ceremony. It was tolerated, then accepted. Eventually it became unremarkable. The most effective transformations often arrived this way, without applause. Streets that once demanded brightness now held shadows easily. Buildings receded into suggestion. The city looked less imposing, not weaker, just calmer. Without full illumination, the scale softened. Rome felt less overwhelming, more human. The absence of fear allowed nights to stretch. Without the urge to flee, the dark people stayed where they were. Inside or outside felt like preference rather than necessity. The boundary between safety and exposure blurred. Darkness no longer marked danger. It marked time. There were fewer reasons to fight the night. No emergency demanded constant visibility. No spectacle required lighting. The city stopped performing for itself. It rested. Children grew accustomed to dimness. Adults adjusted their routines. What once felt unusual became expected. The city did not mourn the loss of brightness. It adapted to its absence. This acceptance changed the quality of rest. Sleep arrived more naturally. Wakefulness no longer felt urgent. The night became a neutral space rather than a challenge. Darkness allowed thoughts to slow without distraction. Rome had always prided itself on mastery, of space, of movement, of light. Learning to live with less of all three required humility. The city did not frame it that way. It simply practiced restraint. The fear that once accompanied darkness had been a habit rather than a necessity. Habits can be unlearned. Rome proved this without comment. Night after night the dark returned, and night after night nothing terrible followed. Eventually darkness stopped being noticed at all. It became the default condition of night. Lamps were appreciated rather than expected. Light became a companion rather than a commander. The city learned that safety does not require constant exposure, that calm does not depend on visibility, that darkness can be stable, reliable, even kind. This was not the end of vigilance, it was the end of excess. Rome did not abandon awareness, it refined it. Attention narrowed, effort conserved, fear released. The night no longer needed to be resisted. It had become part of the city, and the city had become comfortable not seeing everything at once. When the city forgot how loud it used to be. Sound rarely leaves all at once. It thins the way breath does when a body settles into rest. Rome does not wake up one night and discover silence. It grows accustomed to fewer interruptions. Late-night history prefers this kind of disappearance because it does not demand witnesses. People remember explosions. They remember shouting. They do not remember the final evening when the last unnecessary noise failed to appear. This is not the story of silence arriving. It is the story of sound, no longer insisting on itself. There was a time when the city announced its existence constantly. Wheels moved across stone, footsteps overlapped in uneven rhythms, voices carried directions, complaints, greetings, arguments. Sound did not ask permission. It filled space because space existed to be filled. The city measured its vitality through noise. Quiet felt suspicious. A silent street suggested absence. Absence suggested danger. Rome learned early to distrust stillness. Most of the sounds that made the city feel alive were never noticed individually. They blended into something larger, a constant background of activity that reassured people that life continued nearby. A wheel passing somewhere beyond sight, a door closing at a distance, someone calling to someone else without urgency. These sounds did not require attention. Their purpose was presence. As the streets emptied, these noises did not stop abruptly. They became less frequent. A wheel passed once where it used to pass 10 times. Footsteps echoed alone instead of merging with others. Voices dropped in volume because fewer ears waited to receive them. The city did not register this change immediately. Sound fades quietly. At night, the difference became clearer. With fewer people outside, every sound gained definition. A single step traveled farther. A distant movement stood out. The city felt louder and quieter at the same time. Louder because nothing masked individual noises. Quieter because there were fewer of them. This imbalance took time to feel normal. Inside buildings, people noticed first. The walls carried less vibration. Floors rested. Conversations no longer competed with street noise. The city stopped pressing itself into private space. Homes became quieter, not because people spoke less, but because the outside had finally learned restraint. There is something faintly amusing about how much effort cities once invested in being heard. Rome had spent centuries cultivating activity, roads designed to carry traffic, spaces built to amplify voices, stone arranged to reflect sound. Now that machinery continued to exist without being fully used, the city was prepared for noise it no longer needed. The absence of constant sound did not feel empty, it felt spacious. Silence created room for subtlety. Small sounds that had once disappeared into the background became noticeable: the rustle of fabric, the scrape of a chair. Breathing itself gained presence. The city began to hear its inhabitants rather than speak over them. Outside, the streets adjusted without complaint. Stone does not miss sound. It holds it when it arrives and releases it when it does not. An empty road does not feel abandoned by noise. It simply waits. Echoes became rare. The air held less movement. People walking at night changed their pace. Without overlapping sounds, footsteps felt exposed, not unsafe, just noticeable. Movement became intentional. Each step belonged clearly to its owner. The anonymity once provided by noise dissolved. The city grew more personal. The disappearance of background sound also removed urgency. Without constant stimulation, the night felt longer. Time stretched, moments lingered. The city no longer rushed itself. Silence slowed perception. Rome had long equated noise with order. A functioning city made sound. Commerce clattered, labor echoed, authority announced itself. Quiet suggested breakdown. But as the nights passed without disaster, this assumption weakened. Silence did not produce chaos. It produced calm. Some sounds remained out of habit. Guards still walked. Their steps echoed clearly now. Maintenance continued. Doors still opened and closed. The city did not become mute. It became selective. Sound learned to justify itself. There is irony in a civilization built to project power, discovering comfort in restraint. Rome once used sound to declare presence. Now presence no longer required declaration. The city existed whether or not it announced itself. Children adapted quickly. Silence does not intimidate those who grow up within it. Adults took longer. They associated quiet with absence, with something missing. Over time, that association softened. Silence became background rather than warning. The night changed character as sound receded. It no longer felt busy. It no longer felt crowded. Darkness and quiet worked together to reduce stimulation. The city became easier to inhabit, less demanding. People slept differently. Without constant noise, the body relaxed more easily. Rest arrived without resistance. Wakefulness felt less pressured. The night stopped asking for attention. There was no official moment when the city declared itself quieter. No ceremony marked the reduction. Sound simply failed to appear often enough that its absence stopped being noticed. That is how habits change. The streets at night now carried only what was necessary: a passing step, a brief exchange, a door closing. Each sound felt complete on its own, nothing layered on top of it. The city learned to speak in sentences rather than crowds. Rome did not mourn the loss of noise. It did not celebrate it either. The adjustment felt natural once it settled. Sound had been carrying more responsibility than it deserved. Silence relieved it. The city that once feared quiet discovered that quiet was not emptiness. It was capacity. Space for thought. Space for rest. Space for the night to exist without commentary. Late night history stays here because this is where transformation hides. Not in spectacle, in subtraction. When the city forgot how loud it used to be, it also forgot why it thought it needed to be loud at all. When the city forgot how loud it used to be, something else followed quietly behind. Silence stopped needing explanation. It no longer arrived with tension or expectation. It did not suggest danger. It suggested absence. Not the dramatic kind, the ordinary kind. The kind created simply because fewer people were present to make noise. Late-night history pays attention here because this is where misunderstanding often begins. Silence is not always a signal. Sometimes it is just arithmetic. The city did not fall quiet because something chased its people indoors. It fell quiet because fewer people felt compelled to be outside at the same time. No curfews reshaped behavior. No threat reorganized the streets. The night did not intimidate. It simply failed to attract. Sound thinned because participation thinned. That is all. When noise disappears this way, it does not leave a vacuum. It leaves space, the kind of space architecture understands well. Stone and brick have always preferred restraint. They carry sound easily, but they do not require it. Without constant voices, the city reveals a different skill. It holds shape. Streets without noise begin to feel less like roots and more like forms, lines drawn across the ground rather than corridors demanding movement. Without sound pulling attention forward, the eye lingers. Corners become compositions. Distance becomes visible. The city stops behaving like an event and starts behaving like a structure. There is something faintly ironic about this transition. Rome spent centuries perfecting movement, roads engineered for flow, public spaces designed for gathering. Sound was proof that design succeeded. Now the same design supports quiet just as well. The city functions as a container rather than a conductor. Silence does not flatten the city. It clarifies it. Without overlapping noise, individual sounds gain definition. A single step echoes and then resolves. A door closes and completes itself. Nothing competes. Each sound feels finished rather than swallowed. The city begins to speak in complete sentences instead of crowds. This shift changes how people perceive time. Without constant noise, the night stretches. Minutes feel longer. Pauses feel permitted. The absence of background sound removes urgency. There is no audio reminder that something else is happening elsewhere. The city stops insisting on simultaneity. People moving through this quieter city feel more aware of their presence, not in a self-conscious way, in a grounded way. Each movement leaves a trace, a sound that begins and ends cleanly, without noise to dissolve into footsteps, feel owned. The city becomes intimate despite its scale. Buildings also change character. Without sound spilling outward, they appear less animated. Windows no longer glow with activity. Facades retreat into stillness. The city looks less alive and more complete. Architecture does not need occupancy to feel resolved. It waits comfortably. This is the moment when a city begins to resemble a drawing. Lines and volumes without narrative. A composition rather than a story. That resemblance can feel unsettling if one expects cities to perform, but it can also feel calming. The city no longer asks to be interpreted. It simply exists. Silence here is not a mood, it is a condition. It does not carry meaning beyond what created it. Fewer people outside equals fewer sounds. The equation does not require symbolism. Late-night history prefers this honesty. Silence that does not pretend to be profound. There is gentle humor in how quickly people adapt to this state. What once felt eerie becomes ordinary. A quiet street stops feeling suspicious after enough uneventful nights. The mind adjusts its expectations. Silence becomes background rather than foreground. The city at this stage feels less like a living organism and more like a finished object. Not dead, not abandoned, completed. Like a tool placed back on a shelf after use. Still functional, simply waiting. This architectural calm changes how absence is interpreted. Empty does not mean neglected, it means unused for now. A plaza without voices is not failing, it is resting. A street without traffic is not broken, it is available. Rome did not design itself for this role intentionally, yet it accommodates it gracefully. Stone does not grow impatient. Walls do not demand attention. The city demonstrates a quiet confidence in its own permanence. Without noise to animate it, the city reveals proportions more clearly. Heights feel taller, distances feel longer, scale becomes perceptible. Sound once compressed space. Silence releases it. This release alters memory as well. Nights blend together more easily. Without distinct noises to mark time, evenings lose their individuality. The city produces fewer moments worth distinguishing. This is not loss. It is continuity. People begin to remember the city visually rather than audibly. Shapes replace sounds. Roots remembered by shadow and alignment rather than rhythm. The city becomes something to look at rather than listen to. There is no sadness required here. The absence of sound does not imply decline. It implies a shift in use. Cities are allowed to change function. A structure does not lose value because it is not constantly activated. The idea that a city must always sound alive is relatively recent. Older places understand quiet differently. They know that endurance does not require noise. Rome rediscovers this without ceremony. As silence settles, the city stops narrating itself. It no longer provides commentary through constant activity. It trusts the observer to fill in the rest or to leave it blank. Both are acceptable. This stage of quiet does not announce an ending. It announces a pause, not the kind that prepares for action, the kind that exists on its own. Architecture waiting comfortably in time. The night holds the city gently in this state. Without sound, the city feels less demanding, less persuasive. It stops asking to be lived in actively and allows itself to be occupied passively. Late-night history remains here because this is where drama dissolves. Not through destruction, but through subtraction. When sound fades and silence requires no explanation, the city becomes itself in a different register, not louder, not quieter, simply present. Rome at this hour does not perform. It stands. And that is enough. The guards who walked, even when no one watched. There were still people awake when the city learned how to be quiet. That fact mattered more than it first appeared. Silence does not mean absence. It means fewer witnesses. Somewhere between midnight and morning, a small number of figures continued to move through Rome. Not because they were needed urgently, but because stopping felt stranger than continuing. Late night history pauses here because this is where habit outlives meaning. And habit is one of the most reliable forces a city ever creates. The guards did not disappear when the streets emptied. Their presence thinned, but it did not end. Boots still touched stone. Roots were still followed. Corners were still acknowledged. The city might not have required protection at this hour, but the guards were not trained to negotiate with relevance. They were trained to walk. Patrols had always been about visibility. A moving figure suggested order. The sound of steps implied attention. Even when nothing happened, the act of walking itself reassured the city that someone was paying attention. That reassurance once mattered greatly. Now it mattered mostly to the person doing the walking. There is something faintly ironic about guarding emptiness. A man walks a street that offers no conversation, no commerce, no interruption. He turns corners that lead only to more stone. He scans shadows that hold nothing unexpected. The job continues not because it produces results, but because it has not yet been told to stop. These guards were not heroic figures. They were ordinary people performing a task that had slowly detached from its original purpose. Their loyalty was not ideological, it was procedural. A route learned once is easier to repeat than to question. Habit becomes duty when no alternative is offered. The city no longer responded to their presence. No doors opened, no faces looked out from windows. The streets did not acknowledge the patrol. And yet the patrol continued. The guards walked for the sake of walking, for the structure it provided to their own time. Late-night history finds a quiet humor here. The city had become calm enough that protection was largely symbolic, and symbolism had no audience left. Still, the symbol moved. A routine surviving long after its audience has gone is one of the more human behaviors a city produces. These men walked through silence that once would have made them uneasy. Now it barely registered. Silence had become familiar. Their steps echoed clearly, then faded. Each sound completed itself without being absorbed by noise. Walking became meditative, not intentionally, just by default. The guards were not enforcing rules. They were maintaining continuity. The act of walking connected this night to all the nights before it. The city might change its volume, its pace, its expectations, but the patrol line remained intact. That consistency mattered even if no one could articulate why. There is a temptation to imagine that such routines feel pointless, that the guards must have resented the emptiness. But emptiness does not automatically breed frustration. Sometimes it offers relief. A job without interruption is a simpler job. The city no longer demanded vigilance. It only asked for presence. Walking through quiet streets allowed the guard to feel the shape of the city more clearly. Without crowds, the architecture revealed itself. Distances felt longer, corners sharper. The city became something to navigate rather than manage. The work shifted from oversight to movement. In earlier times, a patrol might have been interrupted constantly. Questions, arguments, requests, noise. Now the route unfolded without resistance. The guard passed through a city that no longer asked anything of him beyond completion. That simplicity can be comforting. There is also something deeply conservative about this behavior. Not politically, but structurally. Cities rely on repetition to survive. Even when meaning thins, repetition holds shape. A patrol that continues during quiet hours keeps the idea of order alive, even if order is not being tested. The guard did not know whether his presence mattered. He did not need to know. The system did not require belief. It required motion. Step after step after step, the city accepted that. One could argue that these patrols were unnecessary, that resources were being spent to protect nothing. But cities rarely optimize for logic alone. They optimize for familiarity. Removing a patrol would have required explanation. Continuing it required none. Late-night history often lingers on such moments because they reveal how societies actually function, not through constant adaptation but through delayed response. Systems persist until change becomes unavoidable. In this case, change was not urgent. Quiet had not produced danger. So routines remained. The guards became part of the architecture of the night. moving elements in a static environment. Their presence gave the city a faint sense of continuity. Even as everything else slowed, something still moved. There is a gentle irony in the fact that these guards might have felt more at ease than ever before. No confrontations, no alarms, no demands, just walking. The job reduced to its simplest form. The city did not thank them, it did not acknowledge them. But cities rarely acknowledge those who maintain them quietly. Maintenance is most valued when it fails. When it succeeds, it disappears into normality. The guards walked not because Rome required defense at this hour, but because Rome had not yet learned to tell them to stop. Habit filled the gap left by necessity, and habit does not ask questions. Eventually, even these routines would thin, but not yet. On this night, the guards remained, a small number of moving figures in a city that had learned how to rest. Late-night history does not elevate them to symbols. It simply notices them, walking through empty streets because that is what they had always done. Their presence did not prevent change. It accompanied it. The city became quieter. The streets became calmer. The lights dimmed. Sound receded. And still the guards walked. Not to enforce, not to intimidate, just to continue. In that sense, they represented something honest about Rome, a city that rarely stopped anything immediately. It preferred to let habits outlive their usefulness until they faded naturally. The guards were not protecting the city from danger. They were protecting it from abruptness. The night accepted them. Stone echoed their steps and then returned to silence. No one watched. No one commented. The patrol completed itself, and when the guard turned the last corner and returned to where he started, the city was unchanged. Still quiet, still standing, still unconcerned. The routine had accomplished nothing visible, and that was precisely the point. After the guards completed their routes and the city returned to its quiet balance, another presence remained. It was less visible, but more numerous. The people who did not sleep. Not because they were anxious, not because they were waiting for something, simply because sleep did not arrive on time. Late-night history lingers here because wakefulness without purpose rarely leaves records. It leaves impressions. In earlier years, being awake at night almost demanded movement. If you could not sleep, you went somewhere. A street offered distraction. A tavern offered light and sound. The city once provided reasons to move simply because you were conscious. Now that logic no longer applied. Wakefulness did not require action. Being awake did not imply being outside. Inside rooms across the city, people lay still with open eyes. Lamps burned low or not at all. The body rested even when the mind refused to follow. There was no urgency attached to this state, no task waiting, no obligation to turn wakefulness into productivity. The night stretched and no one attempted to shorten it. These people did not consider themselves restless. Restlessness suggests dissatisfaction. This was different. It was a neutral condition. Consciousness without direction. Awareness without demand. The city did not punish this state. It accommodated it. In quiet rooms, time behaved differently. Without sound or light to mark progress, minutes lost their edges. The night became a continuous surface rather than a sequence. People stopped checking how long they had been awake. Measurement felt unnecessary. Morning would arrive eventually. That was enough information. There is something faintly ironic about a civilization that once rewarded constant activity, discovering tolerance for stillness. Rome had trained its inhabitants to move, to fill time, to justify being awake through motion. Now the city offered no incentive to do so. Wakefulness could exist on its own. Some lay in bed listening to the buildings settle, stone contracting, wood shifting, sounds so subtle they did not interrupt thought. Others sat near windows, watching darkness hold the streets. Nothing changed. That was the comfort. The absence of options removed pressure. When there is nowhere to go, there is no fear of missing anything. The night outside offered nothing different from the room inside. Both were quiet. Both were still. Choice lost. Importance. In earlier times, being awake while the city slept could feel isolating. You were alone while others participated in rest. Now wakefulness felt shared even without contact. Many were awake together yet separate. The city held them all without requiring interaction. This shared isolation softened the experience. The idea that others were also awake doing nothing reduced the need to act. The night became communal without being social, a rare condition that cities occasionally produce when they stop performing. People did not tell stories about these hours. There was nothing to narrate. Thoughts drifted without conclusion. Memories surfaced without attachment. The mind wandered gently. Without stimulation, it slowed on its own. There is quiet humor in imagining an empire that once measured itself by output, now hosting thousands of awake individuals producing nothing at all. No plans formed, no decisions made, just awareness occupying time. The system did not collapse. The city did not suffer. The guards outside walked their routes. Inside, people remained motionless. Both were valid responses to the same night. Movement and stillness coexisting without conflict. The city did not prefer one over the other. For those awake, the night did not feel endless. It felt wide, spacious. Without markers, the hours blended. The concept of wasted time lost meaning. Nothing was expected to happen. That expectation itself was restful. Rooms became small worlds. A bed, a chair, a window, enough. The rest of the city might as well have been distant. The reduction of scale made the night manageable. Some people eventually slept without noticing when it happened. Consciousness faded gradually. Others remained awake until dawn approached. Neither outcome felt significant. The night was not a challenge to overcome. It was a duration to inhabit. Rome did not frame this experience as a problem. There were no remedies offered, no advice given. Wakefulness was allowed. That permission changed its quality. Anxiety often feeds on resistance. Here there was none. The city had become quiet enough that being awake carried no stigma. No one was missing anything. No one was late. The pressure to synchronize with others diminished. Time loosened its grip. Late-night history notices how this changes memory. Nights like these leave few sharp impressions. They blend together. The mind remembers atmosphere rather than events. A long stretch of quiet awareness without punctuation. This lack of narrative is often mistaken for emptiness. It is not. It is saturation. The night filled completely with presence rather than action. There was nowhere else to be and nothing else to do. That completeness brought calm. Even thoughts slowed. Without external triggers, the mind revisited familiar ideas gently. No conclusions were required. Reflection without resolution became possible. The night did not demand answers. The city outside remained still. Lamps held their dim glow. Streets waited without expectation. Guards continued their rounds. Inside, people stayed awake with no destination. All of it fit together. This was not insomnia as struggle. It was wakefulness without agenda. a state rarely documented because it does not lead anywhere. It simply exists and then ends. Rome at this hour was not alive in the usual sense. It was aware, conscious, without intention. The city held its people gently whether they slept or not. When morning eventually approached, it did not interrupt anything. It arrived as the next condition. Those who had been awake simply transitioned. No line marked the change. The night released them quietly. Late night history stays with these people because their experience reveals something essential. A city does not need constant action to hold its inhabitants. Sometimes it only needs to allow time to pass without asking anything in return. After the guards finished walking and the streets accepted their quiet, the night found its last occupants, those who stayed awake and went nowhere. Their stillness completed the city. Nothing needed to happen, and nothing did. When commerce learned how to leave early. The commercial streets did not close with drama. They did not argue. They did not announce a shortage or plead for attention. They simply began to end their days sooner than they used to. Late night history notices this kind of change because it looks insignificant while it is happening. A shutter lowered a little earlier. A counter cleared before darkness fully settled. A merchant deciding that tonight would not improve by waiting. None of these moments felt historic. Together they reshaped the night. There was a time when trade thrived on patience. Shops stayed open because someone might arrive late. Profit lived in possibility. A street full of merchants created its own gravity. The longer they stayed, the more likely it felt that something would happen. The city rewarded optimism. Waiting was part of the business. Then the waiting stopped making sense. Customers did not vanish suddenly. They thinned. Fewer footsteps passed. Fewer glances lingered on displays. The rhythm of exchange lost its pulse. A merchant could stand behind a counter and feel time stretching without promise. The calculation became simple. Staying open no longer paid for itself. This was not fear. Nothing dangerous crept into the streets. The night did not become hostile. It became empty. That distinction mattered. Fear forces retreat. Emptiness invites indifference. Merchants adjusted quietly. Closing earlier felt practical rather than pessimistic. Goods could be sold tomorrow. Lamps did not need to burn through hours without purpose. Energy could be conserved. The city did not punish this choice. It accepted it. There is something faintly ironic about a market withdrawing on its own. No authority shut it down. No decree limited hours. Demand simply stopped arriving. The invisible hand did not strike. It shrugged. As more shops followed this logic, the streets changed character. What had once been corridors of exchange became passages of memory. Signboards remained. Counters stayed stocked. But the interaction that gave them meaning paused for the night. The soundscape shifted first, voices faded, bargaining disappeared. The small noises of handling goods went quiet. Without these sounds, the street felt wider, longer. The absence of commerce created space. Light followed, lamps dimmed earlier, windows went dark, displays retreated into shadow. The street stopped advertising itself. Without customers, there was no audience to impress. Merchants did not mourn this adjustment. Business had always been about reading signals. The signal now was clear. Tonight offered no advantage. Closing was not defeat. It was alignment. Some shops remained open out of habit. A sense of duty lingered. But habit is fragile without reward. One by one, these outliers reconsidered. The street learned consistency. Quiet replaced competition. Walking through these areas at night felt different from walking through residential streets. Homes held people, commercial streets held nothing. Their emptiness was intentional, chosen. The market had stepped back. There is gentle humor in this image, an economy built on movement discovering the efficiency of stillness. The market did not collapse, it rested. Supply waited without demand chasing it. The absence of customers also removed urgency. Without the pressure to serve, the merchant could leave on time, eat, sleep, repeat tomorrow. The night no longer belonged to commerce. It belonged to rest. The city adjusted its expectations. People stopped passing through these streets out of habit. There was nothing to see, nothing to buy. The route lost relevance. Foot traffic rerouted naturally. This withdrawal was not coordinated. No meeting decided it. Individual decisions aligned through shared experience, each merchant reading the same emptiness, each choosing the same response. Late-night history finds honesty here. Markets often pretend to be forces of destiny. In truth, they are collections of people responding to conditions. When conditions change, behavior follows without ceremony. The streets themselves accepted this quietly. Stone does not mind whether it supports trade or silence. It holds space either way. A counter looks the same when closed. A sign hangs patiently regardless of audience. Memory lingered. People remembered these streets as busy places. That memory softened the quiet. The emptiness felt temporary, even as it repeated nightly. Habit takes time to rewrite imagination. Over time, the idea of evening commerce faded. People planned differently. Purchases moved earlier, expectations shifted, the city recalibrated its internal clock. There was no nostalgia attached to this change. Nostalgia requires longing. This adjustment felt sensible. The night had other uses now. Commerce did not need to compete for it. The market had not failed. It had adapted to reduced demand. That adaptation included knowing when to stop, knowing when waiting was no longer strategic. The irony deepened when one considered how much effort had once gone into extending business hours. Lamps installed, guards assigned, streets maintained, all to keep commerce flowing late. Now the same infrastructure supported quiet just as effectively. Shops closed early and nothing terrible happened. The city did not starve. Trade resumed in daylight. The system proved flexible. Resilience revealed itself through restraint. Walking through these commercial areas after closing felt almost polite. The city had stepped aside. No voices competed. No lights demanded attention. The street allowed passage without interruption. The market did not announce its retreat. It practiced it, night after night. A collective decision made without words. This quiet also removed pressure from buyers. There was no fear of missing a deal, no temptation to linger. The night simplified choice. Nothing was open, so nothing was expected. Late-night history stays with this moment because it shows how decline often looks like discretion. Not collapse, not panic, just fewer reasons to keep going. The commercial streets did not disappear. They waited. Waiting is not failure, it is acknowledgement. By closing early, the market conceded something important. Not every hour needs to be monetized. Not every night needs to perform. The city learned that commerce could step back without losing itself. The streets learned to be empty without being abandoned. In that sense, the market did not retreat. It rested. And rest turned out to be sustainable. The night accepted this without comment. The shutters lowered, the lamps dimmed. The street held its shape. Nothing dramatic occurred. And that was the lesson. When commerce learned how to leave early, the city did not become empty, It became layered. The streets below accepted their quiet, but above them life continued in a way that was harder to notice. Late night history follows the sound upward here because this is where misunderstanding usually begins. An empty street suggests abandonment. A dark window suggests absence. Neither assumption is reliable. The insulae remained full. People had not vanished. They had simply stopped presenting themselves. Above the closed shops and unlit counters, rooms held bodies that no longer needed to announce their presence to the street. The city was still inhabited. It had only withdrawn its face. These buildings had always stacked lives vertically. Narrow staircases carried footsteps upward away from public space. Rooms piled on top of rooms. Windows faced inward toward courtyards or outward toward streets that once promised activity. Now those windows looked down on quiet and learned to expect nothing in return. Inside these rooms, people continued with ordinary routines, eating simple meals, sitting without conversation, lying awake without urgency. The night outside offered no invitation, so attention turned inward. Life did not stop. It folded. The darkness of these rooms did not signal neglect. Lamps burned low or not at all because they were no longer needed to compete with outside light. Darkness became practical rather than symbolic. Eyes adjusted. The body accepted shadow. The room felt sufficient without display. There is something faintly ironic about a city that once measured success by visibility, now thriving unseen. Rome had trained itself to perform. Public life mattered because it was witnessed. Now existence without audience felt acceptable. The city discovered privacy on a large scale. From the street below, it would have been easy to assume that the upper floors were empty. Windows dark. No voices drifting down. No movement visible. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The city had simply lifted its life out of sight. In these rooms, people did not feel isolated. They felt settled. The noise of commerce had retreated. The pressure to participate had eased. Without the expectation of engagement, the night grew calmer. Being inside no longer felt like opting out. It felt normal. The vertical separation changed perception. Streets became distant even when physically close. Sound traveled less. Light barely reached upward. The city below existed as an idea rather than a presence. This distance created a gentle disconnection, not alienation, relief. There is quiet humor in imagining how much effort once went into animating these streets for the sake of those above. Noise rose, light climbed, commerce announced itself upward. Now the exchange reversed. The rooms above ignored the street entirely. The city learned that attention does not flow automatically. People adapted their rhythms. Nights became longer. Time inside rooms stretched without interruption. Without shops open below, there was no reason to listen for closing sounds or passing crowds. The city no longer provided cues. The body set its own pace. These upper floors became small islands of continuity. Life persisted without reference to public space. Meals prepared, sleep attempted, wakefulness tolerated. The city became a collection of private moments stacked above one another. The idea of presence changed. To be present no longer meant to be visible. It meant to exist without announcement. Rome had not lost its population. It had lost its audience. Walking through the streets, one might feel the city had thinned, but stepping into these buildings would reveal density. Rooms filled with quiet breathing, stillness holding weight. The city was full yet unreadable from the outside. This unreadability altered the character of urban night. Without visible activity, the city appeared dormant. But dormancy implies potential. These rooms were not dormant. They were active in ways that did not project outward. There is something deeply modern about this arrangement. A city functioning internally without broadcasting itself. Rome arrived here early by necessity rather than design. The insulae became buffers between public quiet and private continuity. The people inside did not feel compelled to look down. The street no longer offered information. It offered only confirmation of quiet. Windows became boundaries rather than vantage points. Darkness inside these rooms was not imposed. It was chosen. Light was conserved, noise minimized, energy preserved. The city learned how to live smaller, without shrinking physically. Late-night history finds significance in this because it shows how cities change without changing shape. Infrastructure remains, population remains, only behavior shifts. The city becomes less legible to itself. From above, the night felt stable, no sudden disturbances, no reason to intervene. The street below existed as a background condition rather than a destination. The absence of visible life created a new kind of calm. Without external stimulation, thoughts slowed, conversation shortened, silence gained legitimacy. The room became enough. These upper floors also held a subtle form of community. Many were awake together without interaction. Many slept simultaneously without coordination, shared timing without shared space. The city became synchronized in stillness. There is gentle irony in how much this arrangement contradicted earlier ideals. Rome had celebrated public life. Visibility equaled value. Now value existed privately. The city functioned without spectacle. This did not feel like retreat. It felt like adjustment. Public life had demanded energy the night no longer returned. Private life asked less. The balance shifted accordingly. The streets below remained intact. They did not resent their reduced role. Above them, rooms continued their quiet labor of existence. The city operated vertically now rather than horizontally. People in these rooms did not feel hidden. They felt contained, protected from unnecessary demand. The city had created layers of engagement and withdrawal. Both were valid. Morning would eventually draw life downward again. But during these hours, the insulae held the city in suspension, full but silent, occupied but invisible. Late-night history stays here because this is where cities become hardest to read. When life retreats upward and inward, emptiness becomes an illusion. The city is not gone. It is simply no longer presenting itself. After commerce learned how to leave early, the rooms above the streets learned how to hold the night. Quietly, completely, without asking to be seen, a night that did not deserve a record. Nothing happened that night. That is the most accurate way to begin. No messenger ran through the streets, no sound gathered urgency, no door was forced open, no fire asked to be remembered. The city passed through the hours, the way it passed through many others without effort or distinction. Late-night history is drawn to these moments precisely because they resist storytelling. They do not offer peaks or lessons. They offer continuity. And continuity rarely asks for witnesses. This night did not interrupt anything. It did not demand reaction. It did not rearrange priorities. People slept or stayed awake according to habit. Guards walked and returned. Lamps burned and faded. Streets remained as they were. If someone had tried to point to a single moment worth noting, they would have struggled. The night refused to cooperate. Cities are often understood through their disruptions. We remember collapse, we remember violence, we remember spectacle, but most nights are not interested in that role. They exist to maintain sequence, 1 hour following another without argument. This night belonged firmly to that category. Nothing about it suggested that it would matter later. No one woke up with the sense that something had passed. No mark was left on the body. No memory insisted on being kept. The night did not challenge the city. It supported it by doing very little. People inside their rooms did not feel watched by history. They were not participants in anything larger than themselves. They ate, they rested, they waited. Time moved at its usual pace without distortion. The absence of event created a steady rhythm that required no interpretation. Outside, the streets accepted their quiet. They did not wait for crowds that would not arrive. Stone does not anticipate, it holds. The night rested on the city evenly. No corner felt heavier than another. The balance remained intact. There is something faintly ironic about how much effort historians spend searching for significance when so much of life happens without it. This night did not announce a decline. It did not symbolize recovery. It did not hint at transformation. It was simply another night doing its job of passing. People often assume that uneventful nights are empty. They are not. They are full of ordinary continuation. Breathing continues. Structures stand. Systems operate quietly. The city does not need constant stimulation to remain alive. This night did not produce records because no one felt compelled to record it. There was no motivation to write, no urgency to report. Documentation thrives on contrast. This night offered none. It blended perfectly with the nights before it and the nights that followed. In later years, when people attempted to reconstruct what had happened around this time, they would find gaps. Not because information was lost, but because nothing demanded to be written down. Silence leaves fewer traces than noise. There is gentle humor in imagining someone attempting to dramatize this night. They would search for tension that did not exist. They would attempt to assign meaning where none was required. The night would resist. It would remain stubbornly ordinary. Cities are sustained by these uneventful hours. Without them, disruption would be constant. Stability depends on nights that do not intervene. This night performed that role perfectly. The absence of disaster does not mean the absence of condition. The city was tired, quiet, adjusted, but those qualities had already settled in. This night neither accelerated nor reversed them. It simply maintained. People did not wake the next morning feeling changed. They did not speak about the night because it had not separated itself from the others. Memory did not grab hold. That lack of imprint was its defining feature. Late-night history pays attention here because this is where misunderstanding often arises. We assume importance requires drama. We assume history advances through shocks. But continuity is built through repetition. Nights like this are the glue. This night did not care whether it would be remembered. It did not need to. Its success lay in its invisibility. The city continued uninterrupted. Systems remained stable. Life resumed as expected. The streets were neither safer nor more dangerous than the night before. They simply were. The absence of event allowed the city to rest within itself. No adjustments were required, no responses activated. People often search the past for turning points. They look for moments where everything changed. Most of the time, nothing changes at all. Most of the time, the past passes quietly. This night belonged to that majority. There is a subtle comfort in recognizing this. Not every hour needs to be meaningful. Not every night needs to teach. Some nights exist to preserve the conditions that allow meaning to emerge elsewhere. The city did not thank the night for its restraint. Gratitude requires awareness. This night slipped through without asking for acknowledgement. It delivered stability and moved on. In later retellings, such nights disappear. They are edited out because they do not advance narrative. But without them, narratives collapse. Continuity matters even when it feels dull. This night asked for nothing and delivered exactly that. No record, no memory, no disruption. And in doing so, it performed one of the most important functions a night can serve. It allowed the city to remain itself without interference. Nothing happened. And that was enough. A night that did not deserve a record does not end when the sun rises. It continues quietly into the following days. That is how decline behaves when it has no interest in drama. Rome did not fall asleep and wake up diminished. It woke up usable. Mostly. Adequately. Slightly less demanded than before. Late night history stays with this stretch of time because this is where the expectation of collapse fails. There is no moment to point to, no sound to mark it. The city does not break. It loosens. Decline here does not announce itself. It does not require permission. It does not interrupt routine sharply enough to be noticed. Rome simply becomes less necessary. Fewer people rely on every street. Fewer spaces justify their original purpose. The city continues functioning while slowly discovering that not all of its parts are required at the same intensity anymore. This is uncomfortable for those who expect endings to be clear. Rome does not provide that clarity. It does not fall. It does not surrender. It does not make a statement. It continues while shedding urgency. The difference is subtle enough to be missed if one is looking for spectacle. The city had once been built to absorb crowds, to process movement, to manage flow, roads wide enough for constant traffic, markets structured for exchange, public spaces designed to host presence. None of these things vanish. They simply host fewer participants. A structure meant for thousands does not protest when used by hundreds. Stone does not complain about underuse. The word decline often implies loss, something taken away, something destroyed. But this version of decline is closer to disinterest. People stop arriving in the same numbers. Activities conclude earlier. Streets wait longer between footsteps. The city does not resist. It adapts by remaining available. There is a faint irony in how much effort is spent later trying to identify the moment when things went wrong, as if Rome missed a meeting where it was supposed to fail publicly. The city declines the invitation. It refuses to offer a single hour that can be blamed. Nothing closes permanently in one night. Nothing ends decisively. What changes is frequency. How often a place is used, how long it remains open, how much attention it receives. These adjustments do not feel like loss. They feel like moderation. Rome becomes a city with more capacity than demand. That imbalance is rarely dramatic. It is mostly quiet. A street that used to be busy now rests. A building that once echoed now holds stillness. The city looks the same from a distance. Only proximity reveals the difference. Late-night history finds this kind of transformation unsettling because it does not align with expectation. We are taught to look for climaxes, turning points, clear causes. This decline offers none. It proceeds through omission rather than action. No one organizes a farewell. There is no ceremony for a street that will be walked less often. No announcement for a plaza that will host fewer gatherings. The city does not know it is becoming something else. It believes it is simply continuing. People still recognize Rome as Rome. That continuity disguises the shift. Familiar names, familiar shapes, familiar routes. The map remains unchanged. Only behavior diverges. The city begins to feel larger than it needs to be. Not empty, excessive. Spaces built for density now hold room. The air feels less compressed. The night stretches wider across unused ground. This spaciousness is not immediately interpreted as decline. It can feel like relief. There is gentle humor in watching a city famous for its dominance discover what it means to be optional. Rome does not stop functioning. It stops insisting. That distinction matters. Decline without insistence feels less like failure and more like adjustment. Some parts of the city remain active, others rest. This unevenness prevents a single narrative from forming. Life continues strongly in pockets. That persistence confuses any attempt to declare an end. Rome does not lose its identity. It redistributes it. Public life becomes more selective. Private life becomes more central. The city contracts inward without shrinking outward. This kind of decline does not produce ruins immediately. Structures remain intact. Maintenance continues. The city still looks capable. That appearance delays recognition. People assume use will return. That assumption lingers. Time passes. Nights repeat. Streets remain quieter than before. Still nothing forces acknowledgement. The absence of crisis allows denial to persist comfortably. Late-night history notices that this is how most systems change, not through collapse but through reduced engagement. When fewer people need a thing, it does not disappear. It waits. The city becomes something that can be lived in without being fully activated. A place that works without being busy. This state feels stable enough to avoid alarm. No one writes about the moment Rome became less used. It does not feel important while it happens. The city still stands. People still live there. What would there be to say? Later generations will describe this period with hindsight. They will draw lines, name causes, assign dates. Those reconstructions will feel cleaner than reality. Reality was gradual and uncooperative. Decline without a moment resists memory. It cannot be commemorated. It does not offer symbols. It leaves behind no clear evidence beyond pattern. Rome did not fall. It simply required less participation. That requirement continued to decrease, quietly, respectfully, without announcement. The city accepted this with remarkable patience. It did not demand revival. It did not rush to fill itself. It allowed underuse to exist. There is something almost dignified about that restraint. Rome did not insist on relevance. It allowed relevance to thin naturally. No one gathered to say goodbye. No one closed the door. The city remained open. It was just visited less often. Late-night history stays here because this is where endings hide. Not in destruction, but in diffusion. When something becomes less central without becoming absent. Rome did not decline in a night. It declined across many nights that looked exactly like the one before. Nights that did not deserve records. And that is why the decline is so difficult to see. It did not arrive. It settled. A city that did not need to be busy. The city did not stop existing when it stopped being busy. That assumption belongs to people, not to stone. Architecture does not measure its worth by footsteps. It does not require applause. Rome discovered this slowly and without discussion. The streets emptied, the nights softened, and the buildings remained exactly where they had always been. Late night history stays here because this is the moment when a city reveals what it actually is beneath activity. Plazas did not collapse when people stopped crossing them. They did not grow anxious. They did not demand purpose. Stone accepts stillness as easily as it accepts movement. A square designed to hold crowds does not fail when it holds air instead. It simply becomes visible in a different way. Columns continued to rise without witnesses. Their function did not depend on admiration. They carried weight regardless of attention. The idea that beauty requires observation is a human insecurity. Architecture has never shared it. A column remains balanced whether or not someone looks up. Arches framed space even when nothing passed through them. They did not feel embarrassed by the absence of traffic. An arch does not exist to be used constantly. It exists to shape space. It performs that role silently. Domes held the sky as they always had. Their curves did not flatten when eyes turned away. Light still moved across their surfaces during the day. Shadow still gathered beneath them at night. The city continued its quiet dialogue with gravity and weather regardless of audience. There is something faintly ironic about how much energy people once spent animating these spaces. Festivals, speeches, markets, processions, all temporary. The stone outlasted them without effort. When the noise faded, the architecture remained calm, balanced, indifferent. Rome had been built to impress, but impressing is not the same as existing. When the city stopped performing, it did not lose form. It lost urgency. The difference is subtle but important. A city that no longer needs to prove itself becomes easier to inhabit. Without crowds, the proportions of spaces became clearer. A plaza felt larger when empty than when filled. Distance reasserted itself. The human scale receded, and the architectural scale returned. This shift was not hostile. It was revealing. People walking through these areas at night felt smaller, not diminished, appropriately sized. The buildings did not lean in. They did not dominate. They simply stood. Their presence was steady rather than demanding. Late-night history finds quiet humor here. A city once obsessed with spectacle discovering that its most durable quality is restraint. Rome did not need to entertain itself to remain impressive. It simply needed to exist long enough. Beauty without witnesses is a difficult concept for people. We are accustomed to thinking that value requires validation. Architecture does not operate on that logic. A well-balanced structure is complete, whether or not it is seen. Rome learned this not through philosophy, but through circumstance. As nights grew quieter, the city began to resemble a model of itself. Clean lines, clear volumes, reduced distraction. Without constant use, the architecture could be read more easily. The city became legible in a new way. This legibility did not inspire panic. It inspired calm. Without noise to compete with form, the buildings asserted themselves gently. They did not shout for relevance. They allowed attention to arrive or not arrive as it pleased. There is dignity in that posture. Rome did not chase its population. It did not attempt to lure people back into public spaces with force. It accepted underuse without resentment. The idea that a city must always be activated is a modern anxiety. Older cities understand dormancy. They know how to wait. Rome demonstrated this skill by remaining stable while its tempo slowed. The plazas did not ask to be filled. The columns did not ask to be touched. The arches did not ask to be passed through. They existed as infrastructure for potential rather than obligation. Potential is quieter than use. It does not demand energy. It does not create noise. It simply remains available. That availability is often mistaken for emptiness. It is not. Walking through these spaces, one could feel the weight of accumulated time. Not in a dramatic way, in a calm way. The buildings had seen activity come and go before. This lull did not surprise them. Late-night history notices that this is where the city becomes most honest, when stripped of crowds and commerce. Architecture reveals its primary role: to hold space, to endure weather, to remain upright. Rome did not need movement to justify its existence. It had already justified itself through construction. Everything after that was use. Use can diminish without erasing foundation. There is gentle irony in imagining how many speeches were once delivered in these places about permanence. The stone listened, the speeches faded. Permanence remained. As fewer people passed through these areas, the city did not feel abandoned. It felt settled, like a room after guests have left. Furniture remains, walls stand. Silence replaces conversation without damaging the structure. The absence of constant activity also reduced wear. Stone rested, surfaces recovered. The city aged more slowly, when used less aggressively. Calm preserved form. Rome became something closer to what it had always been beneath the noise, a collection of shapes arranged to resist gravity and time. The night allowed this truth to surface. There is no tragedy in this, only adjustment. A city, learning that it does not need to be constantly activated to remain meaningful. People often equate stillness with death. Architecture knows better. Stillness is its natural state. Movement is temporary. Rome discovered that it could continue without spectacle, that its identity did not depend on how many people crossed its plazas at night. The buildings did not care, and that indifference turned out to be comforting. Late-night history stays with these quiet spaces because they remind us of something easy to forget. A city is not its crowds, it is its structure. Crowds come and go. Stone stays. The plazas remained open. The columns remained upright. The domes remained whole. Beauty did not diminish. It simply waited. The city did not need to be busy to be complete. A city that did not need to be busy eventually revealed something else. It was not broken, it was oversized. That distinction mattered. Rome did not feel damaged at night, it felt excessive, like a structure built for a crowd that had already gone home. Late-night history stays in this moment because it is easy to mistake surplus for failure. The city itself did not make that mistake. The streets were still paved, the buildings still held. Water still moved where it was supposed to move. Stone carried weight without complaint. Nothing essential had stopped working. What had changed was scale. The system remained vast while the number of people actively using it had quietly shrunk. This imbalance did not produce chaos. It produced space. Corridors built for thousands now held dozens. Squares designed for assemblies now held air. The city functioned the way a theater functions after the performance. Seats empty, structure intact. Purpose paused rather than lost. Rome had been engineered to manage density, crowds, noise, traffic. That engineering did not fail when density declined. It simply became more noticeable. A road wide enough for constant movement feels different when walked by one person. The distance between walls stretches. Sound behaves differently. Space asserts itself. There is something faintly ironic about a city once defined by expansion, discovering that it has more capacity than it requires. Rome had spent centuries adding roads, Baths, markets, storage, infrastructure layered upon infrastructure. That accumulation did not reverse itself when demand eased. It remained in place, waiting. The system was larger than the lives currently passing through it. Not hostile, not useless, just generous, in a way that now felt unnecessary. Excess without urgency. People living within this system adapted without commentary. They used what they needed. They ignored what they did not. The city allowed this flexibility. It did not force participation in every space it offered. At night, this surplus became more apparent. Without crowds to compress perception, distances felt longer. A walk across a forum took the same time but felt more exposed. The city appeared to have grown, even though it had not changed at all. This is where misunderstanding often begins. Observers see emptiness and assume decay. But emptiness here was not caused by collapse. It was caused by reduced demand. A difference subtle enough to require patience. Late-night history notices that systems rarely shrink gracefully. They persist at full size while usage declines. That persistence can look like failure if one expects constant optimization. Rome did not optimize itself smaller. It waited. Waiting is not inefficiency, it is endurance. Stone does not know how to downsize, it knows how to stand. The city continued offering everything it had always offered: roads, shelter, protection, organization. What changed was how much of that offer was accepted. People selected rather than consumed. This selective use created a peculiar calm. There was no competition for space, no pressure to occupy everything. The city stopped feeling urgent because it no longer needed to accommodate extremes. The system was larger than necessity, but not larger than capacity. That distinction kept it stable. Rome was not stretched. It was underused. Underused does not break stone. Overuse does. There is gentle humor in imagining a city built for spectacle now serving moderation. The infrastructure waited patiently for demands that did not arrive, and when they did not arrive, nothing protested. The baths did not demand crowds, the roads did not insist on traffic, the forums did not call for speeches. They existed in readiness rather than execution. People passing through these spaces felt the scale mismatch. A single voice echoed longer. A single step traveled farther. The city magnified small actions because there were fewer of them. This magnification did not feel threatening. It felt clarifying. The city made individual presence noticeable again. One person mattered more when the system around them was vast and quiet. Rome had once absorbed individuals into crowds. Now it framed them. The system no longer erased the single figure. It highlighted it. That shift altered how people experienced the city. Movement became deliberate, sound felt personal. The night did not swallow actions. It preserved them briefly before releasing them back into silence. The system remained intact because it was not stressed. Pipes did not burst. Walls did not crack. Streets did not crumble. A city underused ages differently than a city overworked. Late-night history finds this important because it challenges the idea that decline must be violent. Sometimes decline looks like excess capacity, a city capable of more than is currently asked of it. Rome did not dismantle itself. It did not simplify. It did not adapt visibly. It remained larger than necessary and accepted that condition. This acceptance prevented panic. No one rushed to fix the imbalance because it was not hurting anyone. Life continued comfortably within the available portion of the system. There is something almost elegant about that restraint. A city choosing not to interfere with its own scale. allowing time to decide what would be used and what would wait. From a distance, the city looked the same. Walls, roofs, streets. Only close observation revealed the gap between capacity and use. That gap felt calm rather than alarming. People often confuse fullness with health. Rome quietly contradicted that assumption. It remained functional without being filled. The system larger than its users created a buffer, a margin of safety, space to absorb change without rupture. That margin is invisible until needed. Late-night history stays with this stage because it is where cities become resilient, not through efficiency but through tolerance, through having more than is immediately required. Rome did not need to be fully activated to remain stable. It needed only enough use to justify maintenance. The rest could wait. That waiting did not feel temporary. It felt open-ended. The city did not know when demand would return, or if it would. It did not prepare for either outcome. It simply stood. Stone does not plan. It persists. A city larger than the lives inside it can feel empty if one expects noise. It can feel peaceful if one accepts proportion. Rome leaned into the latter without announcing it. The night made this imbalance visible. Without crowds and commerce, the scale difference emerged clearly. The system dwarfed its users gently. No alarm sounded, no correction followed. The city accepted being more than was necessary. In that acceptance, Rome revealed something fundamental. A city does not fail when it becomes redundant in parts. It fails when it cannot hold what remains. Rome held everything that remained easily. The system waited, and waiting was enough. Morning came without asking. Morning arrived the way it always had. Light found its way into the city without ceremony. Shadows shifted. Stone warmed slightly. Nothing dramatic announced the change. The night did not resist being replaced. It did not linger. It did not ask for recognition. Late-night history appreciates mornings like this because they confirm that continuity is more powerful than memory. The city wakes not because something happened, but because waking is what cities do. People opened their eyes without recalling anything unusual. No dream clung tightly enough to demand interpretation. No sound from the night echoed into consciousness. The body adjusted to light and moved on. The night had left no residue. That absence was its success. Doors opened, some later than others. The rhythm of morning resumed at a slower pace than in earlier years, but still steady. Rome did not hurry to compensate for lost time. It did not feel behind. The city had learned that urgency was optional. Streets filled just enough to function. Not crowded, not empty, useful. Footsteps returned in small numbers and felt louder than they once had. The city accepted them without reacting. Stone does not celebrate traffic. It holds it. No one spoke about the night. There was nothing to say. Conversation prefers contrast, and the night had offered none. It blended seamlessly into the long sequence of nights before it. Memory requires disruption. This night provided stability instead. Markets reopened without commentary, some later than in the past, some not at all. The absence of certain routines did not register as loss. It registered as adjustment. People bought what they needed and did not linger. Commerce continued without insisting. The guards finished their shifts and disappeared into anonymity. Their steps left no imprint worth following. The city did not thank them. Maintenance rarely earns acknowledgement. It earns continuation. Above the streets, rooms stirred quietly. Windows admitted light. Shadows retreated. The private world reasserted itself. Life resumed inward before moving outward. The city did not rush its own reappearance. Rome continued in the way it had learned to continue, with less noise, less insistence, less performance. The city did not miss what it no longer required. It had already adjusted its expectations. There is something gently ironic about how little effort is needed to forget a night. Histories are written around moments that resist forgetting. This one invited it. Forgetting was not a failure. It was alignment. The idea that every night should matter is a human preference, not a historical one. Most nights exist to preserve sequence, to allow the next day to arrive intact. This night performed that role perfectly. Rome did not become different because of it. It became slightly more itself. A city that could pass through hours without incident. A city that did not demand attention to validate existence. Morning revealed no evidence of decline or recovery, no new scars, no sudden repairs. The city looked much as it had the day before. Only the pace had softened. That softness did not alarm anyone. People moved with a sense of familiarity rather than purpose. The city did not require explanation, it required presence. Enough people appeared to make things work. The rest could stay where they were. There was no desire to record the night after the fact. Records require justification. This night offered none. It did not teach. It did not warn. It did not promise. It simply passed. Late-night history lingers on these endings because they resist drama, a conclusion without punctuation, an ending that does not feel like one. The night concluded by dissolving into morning without leaving a trace. Rome continued, slower, quieter, still standing, still functioning. The city did not need the night to be remembered to move forward. In time, many such nights would accumulate. Together, they would shape the city more than any single event ever could. But individually, they would remain unremarkable. This night did not deserve a record, and because of that, it belonged fully to the city rather than to history. Morning came, Rome remained. That was enough.